Hello Mila, hello Jack. Hello everyone else who's watching today. Today's book on Storytime with Grandad is from the Postman Pat series, and this is Postman Pat Makes a Splash. There was a new baby at Greendale Farm, baby Paul. One hot summer day, Pat and Jess called with the letters. Baby Paul was having a lovely time. He was sitting in his yellow plastic baby bath in a sunny place in the garden. Paul loved the water. He splashed and shouted. Mrs. Pottage tickled his tummy. Paul laughed and gurgled. He loved his plastic duck. In the pond, the real ducks splashed. They quacked and quacked. They loved the water, just like baby Paul. "Good morning," said Pat, coming with the letters. "What a nice day for a swim. Is there room for me?" "I don't think you'd fit in," said Mrs. Pottage. "Goo goo gurgle," said Paul. "Quite right," said Pat. "What about Jess?" said Mrs. Pottage. "Would Jess like a paddle?" Jess hid. He hated the water. There was a shout from the yard. "Quick, quick, catch it, look out!" There was a tip-tap of feet running across the yard. There was a clump of boots running across the yard. Who was it? Pat ran to the garden gate. "My goodness," said Pat, "it's your pig. It's run away. And Peter Fogg's after it." "It'll be that Jenny again," said Mrs. Pottage. "Oh, she's a demon. She's forever running away. And Peter will never catch her by himself." "I'll go and give him a hand," said Pat. "No," said Mrs. Pottage. "I know that pig better than anyone. She'll behave for me. Oh, Pat, could you see to Paul? Just dry him and put his nappy on. I'll catch that pig in a minute." "Leave it to me," said Pat. "I'm sure I can manage a baby better than a pig." Pat held Paul in his baby bath. Mrs. Pottage ran after the pig. Jess came to see what was going on. Paul laughed and splashed in his baby bath. "No more splashing," said Pat. "I'm getting wet." Paul didn't know what Pat said. He was too small. He splashed and splashed. "Oh dear," said Pat. "I'm getting very wet." Jess watched. He didn't come too near. He didn't want to get wet. "You better come out now," said Pat. But Paul didn't want to come out of the water. He kicked when Pat tried to lift him out. He kicked and splashed. Pat got wetter and wetter. "Come and help me, Jess," said Pat. Jess stood where Paul could see him and said, "Meow." Paul looked at Jess. Paul said, "Ooh, goo S." He stopped kicking. He liked Jess. He wanted to play with Jess. "You can play with Jess," said Pat, "when you're dry. Jess doesn't like the water." Paul kept still. Pat lifted him onto the towel. He wrapped the towel around him and he dried him all over. Now Jess came to Paul. "That's right," said Pat. "Stroke Jess nicely. Now let's see about this nappy. Keep still, Paul. Now let's see. How on earth do you put a nappy on? Dear me, what a time Pat had with that nappy. He thought it would be like making a parcel. It wasn't. Parcels keep still. Babies don't. Paul wriggled and giggled. He thought it was all a big joke. He just wouldn't keep still. Every time Pat got the nappy on, Paul kicked it off again. Pat got the nappy on at last, and he couldn't find the safety pin. Then the garden gate flew open. The pig ran into the garden, with Mrs. Pottage and Peter Fogg after it. It went through a flower bed, knocked the dustbin over, broke 2 milk bottles, and ran out through the hedge. And what a squealing it made! The hen and her chicks went and hid behind the rockery. The foal galloped over and looked over the hedge to see what was going on. Mrs. Pottage caught the pig at last by rattling a bucket full of mash. She thought it was feeding time, but soon found out it wasn't. "I need a bath and a brush after that," said Mrs. Pottage, when she came back. "Now, let's see how Pat and Paul are getting on." How she smiled when she saw them. Pat was sitting with a crumpled nappy in his hand. He looked very tired. Paul was playing with Jess. He'd given Jess his woolly ball to play with. He was laughing and gurgling at him. They were having a lovely time. Said Mrs. Pottage. "You didn't get far with that nappy, did you?" "Deary me," said Pat. "He just would not keep still." "Well, he likes playing with nothing on," said Mrs. Pottage, "and he's having a lovely time with Jess. But we'd better get his nappy on now. You just have to be firm, you know." A puff of talc and a few squeals later, Paul was tucked into his nappy and his clothes. "I must say," said Mrs. Pottage, "you two make very good babysitters. I'll take the letters round, and you can look after Paul for the day." "I think I'll stick to letters," said Pat. "I'm better at that. I'd better be on my way now." "Thanks for keeping an eye on Paul," said Mrs. Pottage. "I don't know what we would have done without you. Cheerio." "I think Jess helped more than I did," said Pat. "Bye." At lunchtime, Pat put his hand in his pocket and found a piece of soap and a safety pin. The soap was furry from the fluff in his pocket, and next time he had to wrap a parcel, he found it ever so easy. The end. Bye-bye, Mila. Bye-bye, Jack. We'll see you soon. Goodbye, everyone else who's watching. Bye.